With all the uncertainty surrounding the Edmonton Oilers forward group, they can't just lean on Connor McDavid and Leon Draisaitl to save the day. If the Oilers are going to return to a Stanley Cup final for the third straight year, it's going to be on the backbone of their team, their defense.
You are Locked On Oilers, your daily podcast on the Edmonton Oilers, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to this Tuesday edition of Locked On Oilers. I am your host, Nick Zararis. This upcoming October will be my 10th season doing digital hockey content, and I am so grateful to every single person who is making Locked On Oilers their first listen of the day. Locked On Oilers is a part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where we've got your team covered every day. And today's show, we are going to continue our series discussing the 5 biggest storylines facing the Oilers as they enter the 2025-2026 season. Yesterday, we talked about the uncertainty regarding the forward group. Today's show, why the Oilers defense is going to be the key to offsetting any potential offensive problem. So we're going to start out our show by talking about why the Oilers are maybe miscategorized as an offensive team by virtue of having Connor and Leon. We talked about this quite in depth on yesterday's show, so if you haven't gotten a chance, I do recommend you check it out so you get a better understanding of what we're hitting on today. We'll explore the Oilers' improvement defensively over the last handful of seasons. In our second segment, we'll talk about why the Oilers personnel is stronger on the back end than it is up front overall, obviously. And then in our final segment, we'll talk about why, from a simple risk assessment, the Oilers defense is going to be more inclined to be able to answer some of the questions about this team. So to start things out, perception and reality are two very different things. You think about the dreams you might have, you think about the movies you might watch, the music you might listen to. Those are perceptions. Those are external realities you're experiencing. In the case of a dream, you might not recognize it's only a dream. But in the case of our Oilers, the Oilers have slowly but surely evolved over the last handful of seasons. And I don't think it's a coincidence, and I've made this point on several occasions. My everydayers are very well familiar with it. The Edmonton Oilers became legitimate Stanley Cup contenders when they acquired Mattias Ekholm a couple of years ago. The acquisition of Ekholm unlocks a caliber of player the Oilers simply had not had at that position. You think about the struggles to identify and maintain a quality first pair defenseman there, the various rotation of guys, Darnell Nurse, Duncan Keith, Oscar Klefbom, Tyson Barrie, Adam Larson. The Oilers have tried so many guys over the years to fill out that group. And I make no hesitation and have no reservation in saying, if the Oilers don't acquire Mattias Ekholm, Evan Bouchard does not become as good as he is. And some people will say, well, if the talent's the talent, what? No. Talent requires a certain baseline in its environment to be able to thrive. We always talk about nature versus nurture. I am strongly a proponent of nature having an outsized impact on a player's development, and just why I'm so adamant about young players getting certain types of opportunities, being thrown to the wolves to a degree. You don't want Evan Bouchard out there playing 26 minutes a night on Sharks. I think that would be bad for his development. He would pick up bad habits, but when you unlock that first step, that elite first pair, it opens up so many doors for you. And for much of his career, I would dare to say Mattias Ekholm has been underrated. He's been underappreciated. But since Ekholm's arrival several seasons ago, the Oilers have incrementally gotten better defensively. Some of that is an organizational thing, going from Jay Woodcroft to Chris Knoblauch. Knoblauch definitely has more of a defensive approach to the way he thinks about the game. And yes, that, as we talked about yesterday, has had a trickle-down effect to maybe stunting the Oilers' offense a little bit because they're so inclined to be defensively oriented, to worry a little bit more about puck possession and minimizing the amount of defense they need to play, as opposed to maybe creating as much dangerous offense as they can. And there's no right way to do this. And I do want to emphasize that we don't have the golden roster blueprint. This is not like the other professional sports where we have a baseline understanding. In baseball, you need 3 or 4 power hitters, you need 2 starting pitchers, you need 2 relievers. You got that. you can make some noise in the playoffs, even if the rest of your roster isn't the most well-rounded. In football, you get one good quarterback, one good pass rusher, one elite wide receiver. You can hang around. I'm not saying you can win the Super Bowl the way the Bengals are built, but you can be a 9-10 win team with that core of elite players. In basketball, you get two superstars, you got a seat at the table. It's that simple. Brown and Tatum a couple years ago. This past year, Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, and I would venture to say Chet Holmgren qualifies as a superstar, even if he's maybe a little early in his development. Hockey, we don't have a defined, okay, you need X, Y, and Z. Now, there are certain things that help. The number one defenseman, an upper echelon goalie. Doesn't even need to be elite. You can win a Stanley Cup with Darcy Kemper, with Jordan Binnington, with Aiden Hill. Doesn't need to be elite, but upper echelon, upper half. You need at least two superstar forwards. And then the rest, you can kind of fill in however you want. But the Oilers, over the last 3 years, have undergone a serious transformation, and the numbers bear that out. So since Mattias Ekholm arrived in 2022-2023, the Oilers have ranked 4th, 2nd, and 3rd in scoring chances against. They've ranked 12th, 5th, and 11th in shots against. They have ranked 17th, 8th, and 21st in goals against. They have ranked 12th, 9th, and 10th in expected goals against. They've ranked 5th, 6th, and 3rd in high danger chances against. Over the course of Mattias Ekholm's tenure in Edmonton, and as Evan Bouchard has emerged as an elite defenseman, the Oilers have gotten significantly more game control. And I do want to round out this first segment by talking about something that's a little bit complicated if you're not as well versed in these statistics. These numbers tell you the Oilers are not playing that much defense. This is telling you that the Oilers profile as a strong defensive team because they don't concede a lot. You look at the goals against, of course, the goaltending question mark comes in there. Part of the reason why the Oilers maybe concede some more goals than they should based on these underlying numbers. And again, these underlying numbers are not predictive. They do not tell you what is going to happen. They can give you an idea, but ultimately there are more nuanced factors that go into it more than just who has more shots, who has more expected goals. But when you play as much offense as the Oilers do, it takes a lot of the magnifying glass. It takes a lot of the microscope off of the way your defense plays, the way your goaltender plays. We've talked about it quite a bit the last 2 weeks. Last year, the Oilers only asked Stuart Skinner to face 26 shots on goal per game. So if he only needs to save 24, 23 shots on goal per game, and the Oilers win most nights, that's very doable. That is very straightforward. It is part of the reason why the Oilers have skewed a little bit more towards defensive responsibility and have invested a little bit more in their back end. Yes, I know in hindsight, you probably wouldn't have given Darnell Nurse that extension, but that is a recognition that, hey, we are spending a lot of money here between Bouchard and Ekholm, Darnell Nurse, Jake Walman, not an insignificant amount of money, Brett Kulak, I would say a well-paid third pair defenseman. So the Oilers are spending a decent chunk of money on their back end. The Oilers have pretty established guys on their back end. That is in direct contrast to what we are seeing in this forward group, where the Oilers are going to be asking a lot of guys like Ike Howard and Matthew Savoie, maybe somebody like a Vasily Podkolzin or a Kasperi Kapanen, maybe even someone like an Adam Henrique or a Ryan Nugent-Hopkins, where we're asking guys in their mid to late 30s to turn it back on, to look like DeAndre Hopkins did against the Bills on Sunday Night Football. But it's important to understand that just because you don't play a lot of defense doesn't mean you are good at defense, because underlying numbers-wise, the Oilers have a remarkable defense the last 2 seasons. They've been one of the best defensive teams in the entire NHL, but they do concede a lot of goals, and partly that's on the goaltending. And then, because they don't play as much defense, each of those individual shots on goal or scoring chances, they become more valuable. And that's why it feels like Stuart Skinner is swinging these games where he has one stinker, but if you only face 25, 26 shots on goal, you give up one stinker, you give up 2 good ones. It's really hard to make the math work at times. And the Oilers are in a weird position where they profile, at least anecdotally, as one type of team, but in reality, there's something entirely different. We are going to take our first break on today's edition of Locked On Oilers. When we come back, we're going to talk about that Ekholm-Bouchard pair and why it's been the key to the Oilers becoming Stanley Cup contenders right after this break. The NFL season is here, and FanDuel is making sure you're ready for kickoff with a can't miss offer. Right now, new FanDuel customers can bet just $5, and if your bet wins, you'll get $300 in bonus bets to use on the FanDuel app. I love using FanDuel because it makes however you want to play. Props, same game parlay, live betting, all easy to make happen. It makes every single game more exciting, whether you're watching your favorite team or just keeping an eye on your fantasy teams. It's quick, easy, and the best way to add a little bit of juice to your football Sunday. So, FanDuel has one question. Are you ready? Download the FanDuel app now or visit FanDuel.com to get started. One more time, that's FanDuel.com for your chance at $300 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. We here at Locked On have an important request. We want to hear from you. We've been putting together a survey to learn more about our listeners and make your favorite podcasts even better. This is your chance to tell us what you like, what you don't, and answer questions about our advertisers. Go to lockedonpodcast.com/survey to get started. Everyone who completes the survey will be entered for a chance to win one of 10 $100 Amazon gift cards. Again, that's lockedonpodcast.com/survey. You can also find the link in the show notes. Thank you so much for helping us out. Thank you to everyone who is hanging out on this Tuesday edition of Locked On Oilers as we return to 5 episodes per week in the ramp up to the start of the 2025-2026 NHL season, which will be my 4th with the Locked On Podcast Network. And my friends, it's very straightforward. I feel better about the Oilers' defensive personnel than I do about their forward group. And yes, I am aware the forward group features Connor McDavid and Leon Draisaitl. But beyond those two guys, and as 2018, 19, 20, and 21 will indicate, just those two guys alone is not enough for the Oilers to be serious contenders. Could you make the playoffs with those two guys doing a majority of the heavy lifting? Yes, you can. Undoubtedly, you can get in. But the goal here is not just to get in. In fact, I would dare to say your goal is to win the whole thing. And look, I've been pretty adamant this summer that the Oilers don't have the horses, that they're just not going to have enough scoring depth to be a serious Stanley Cup contender this year. But if the Oilers can really embrace this defense-first approach, if they can really approach this defensive identity, and yes, it is a lot harder to win with defense than it is with offense. And it's a lot better to be good at situational defense than it is to just be a defense-first team. I think you can point to the Carolina Hurricanes of the last few years under Rod Brind'Amour as an example of a really good defensive team that when the chips are down in these tight playoff series against teams that have a little bit more of offensive flair to them, that's where your margin for error is really small. Because one goal, losing 2-1, 3-2, you got a better chance of winning a high-scoring game with more variance than you do a low-scoring game. And I know that's counterintuitive to what a lot of hockey people perceive as being the way to go, where you want to play low-event games, let your superstars drive play to steal 1 or 2 plays in a given game and swing the outcome. But the way the Oilers are presently constructed, 5 of your 6 guys are answered for. You're running Ekholm-Bouchard. You have Nurse and Jake Walman, who may or may not play together. You have Brett Kulak. You have Ty Emberson. You do, yes, have Josh Brown. And you have Troy Stecher. You have 9 guys for 6 spots. The Oilers are going to need to make a decision as far as Emberson or Stecher. I think it would be very reasonable for the Oilers to end up putting Troy Stecher on waivers, unfortunately, because you're not going to carry a guy who's making any money in this environment because you need that roster space. You need that money. And when you look at this defense, everything flows off of Ekholm and Bouchard. They have almost 2,500 minutes together at 5-on-5 over the last 3 years. They have some of the best underlying numbers, 60% scoring chances, 60% expected goals, 58% of actual goals, 58% of high danger chances. This is as dominant a first pair as there is in the entire National Hockey League. And through that, all else is possible. And that brings us to the first part of this conversation about what's reasonable in our expectations. We don't know what Mattias Ekholm we're getting, just candidly. He was not great after January of last year. He was dealing with nagging injuries. He got sick. He got hurt during the Four Nations. He came back too early, got hurt again, came back in the Western Conference Finals against the Stars. Didn't look particularly good there. Didn't look good in the Stanley Cup final either. And just being frank, he's 35. He's coming off of a serious injury. Would you be that shocked if he's a lesser version of himself. And the thing I always compare it to, and the way I talk about players aging, if you have an older phone, it dies a little bit faster because your max charge isn't the same. Apple has this in their phone. I don't know if Android does, but if you go into your iPhone and you go to battery, it'll tell you your battery health. It'll tell you the maximum percentage it can charge up to. Yes, it will still say 100% on the display, but mine says something like 83%, 84%, and my phone's like 2 years old, maybe 3 years old. So the maximum it can recharge to is 84%. And most of the time, that's fine. But if I have the occasional day where I leave the house 9, 10 o'clock and I forget a charger, I don't have access to an outlet, or I forget my portable, it's dead by 4 o'clock. And that can be a problem if I need to get somewhere, if I need to call, an Uber or Lyft, a cab, if I need to get on the subway or buy a rail ticket. There are real issues here when you are talking about diminishing returns and diminished maximum health. I struggle to think of a world where the Oilers can stay Stanley Cup contenders if Ekholm is at least not a second pair guy. Maybe you're looking at this and you want to give Stan Bowman a charitable read, the way I've been assuming they would like Jake Walman to assume that Mattias Ekholm role, that Ekholm takes a little bit less on his next deal. Ekholm is an unrestricted free agent after this year, but if he were willing to do 50%, 60% of his present salary for 1 or 2 years, I think that would be the ideal outcome for all parties involved. Of course, I want to see what Ekholm looks like. And generally, the further away you are from your major surgery, the healthier you're going to be, the better you're going to play. And there is no guarantee of that, though. That is the important caveat or carve out there anytime you say that. Yes, Ekholm should be healthier. He should play better. That is not guaranteed. But I do think if that's your big question mark, what version of Ekholm you're going to get, I think that's a little bit less daunting than who are the top 6 wingers going to be around McDavid and Draisaitl. That is a significantly more uncertain area of the roster. They don't know. Zach Hyman's probably going to miss the first month of the season because of that broken wrist he suffered in the Western Conference Finals. Okay, so you need to fill out 2 left wings and 2 right wings in the top 6. You have Ike Howard, you have Matthew Savoie. Both very unproven at the NHL level, though Savoie did have a nice cup of coffee with the Oilers last year. You have Mangiapane. You have European free agent David Tomasek. You do, I guess, have Matthias Janmark. You have Ryan Nugent-Hopkins. You have Adam Henrique. You have Trent Frederick. Oilers have a better chance of figuring out one defenseman spot than they do a forward spot. And last year's the evidence. We went into last season, opening night, saying this team needs another defenseman. They do not have 4 defensemen you feel good about in their top 4. Last year, they went in with Emerson. They had Travis Dermott on the PTO. They had Josh Brown. They had Troy Stecher. We knew when the season started last year they needed one more guy. They made do. Brett Kulak had his best season as a pro. I do think he might have been a little bit overmatched the further along he got in the regular season, though. To be fair, he had a very good playoffs playing alongside Evan Bouchard the first 3 rounds of the postseason. So that first pair unlocks everything else. And because you only need 6 guys as opposed to 12, the chances of filling in one of those spots, though significant as Ekholm's is, as the number 1 defensive guy, the number 1 left-handed guy, I think you have a better chance of being able to facsimile that than you do trying to facsimile 4 wingers in the top 6. Yeah, Nuge might bounce back. No, Hyman won't be out the whole year. But the Oilers have a better chance of figuring out their defense with an overall philosophy as a team than they do manufacturing more offense, because scoring goals is the hardest thing to do in the NHL. And it's the most expensive thing to do in the NHL. It's why they couldn't go out there and get anyone. So we are going to take our second and final break on today's show. When we come back, we're going to lay it out real simple why ultimately this upcoming season is going to fall on the defense right after this. Thank you to everyone who is hanging out on this Tuesday edition of Locked On Oilers as we are breaking down the 5 biggest storylines facing the Oilers as they enter the 2025-2026 NHL season. Yesterday, we talked about why the offensive uncertainty is the biggest question mark, why the injury to Zach Hyman, why Ike Howard and Matthew Savoie, though talented, are unproven, and what that means for the team's math. You're going to need to score 3.5, 4 goals a game most nights if you want to win in the NHL these days. McDavid and Draisaitl are going to do their part. That's not the question. After watching the Oilers come up short in the Stanley Cup final 2 years in a row, largely, in my opinion, because they couldn't score enough, especially as those series went along, as Florida adapted, as they took away certain lanes. It put the Oilers in an awkward position where they needed to improve the forward group. They had no cap space to do it. In fact, they subtracted guys like Evander Kane, who I know didn't play in the regular season, but was a contributor in the playoffs, why they had to subtract Victor Arvidsson, who, though he didn't have a pop season as an Oiler, he wasn't bad. He had 14, 15 tucks. He was playing top 6 minutes. He wasn't a liability out there. You lost Corey Perry, who was fourth on the team in goals last year. You lost Connor Brown, who had 10 goals last year. You're replacing that with largely unproven pieces. So, by definition, that means you need to fill in the gap somewhere. And we've talked all summer about what's the math? How many goals can they realistically expect from Howard, from Savoie, from Mangiapane? Can Podkolzin take a step? Realistically, if the Oilers are going to stay where they've been the last few years, it requires the defense to take a step. And based on what I've said about Ekholm, based on the way I've talked about Darnell Nurse for much of the last 12 months, you'd be pretty surprised for me to say, I think ultimately the defense has a better chance of fulfilling that obligation than the unproven forwards. I think the full season of Jake Walman, he's going to play in the Brett Kulak role from last regular season. I think that's exciting. I think having another guy who can legitimately move the puck at a high-end level and skate well with the puck as a defenseman is going to open doors. You know, last year, I spent a lot of time pounding the desk asking, can we get Ekholm and Bouchard together? Excuse me, not Ekholm and Bouchard. Can we get Jake Walman and Evan Bouchard together at end of games in must-score situations because their skill sets are both so offensively inclined? And realistically, the Oilers can do that. If you want to go full defense second pair and ask Ekholm and Nurse to eat minutes, I think you can get away with that, but I get it. And we've talked about this a lot over the last 2 years with me as host. My everydayers know I have come around on the idea of overloading, of playing Ekholm with Bouchard and then with McDavid and Hyman as much as they possibly can. Well, yes, it'd be ideal if you had enough talent to distribute throughout your lineup. You know, it'd be ideal if every lineup was as deep as Team Canada or Team USA, where you could play a Travis Konechny on the fourth line. But be that as it may, where teams have salary caps, they can't play superstars in depth roles. It forces you to get a little more resourceful. It forces you to get a little creative. And I don't have a great answer for you as far as the Oilers offense goes, but this defense should be good. Objectively, this defense should be good. Change coaches, no more Chris Knoblauch. Change coaches, no more Paul Coffey running the bench on the back end. I think that's something that a lot of people were they felt awkward about. And real quick as an aside, this is why I'm not a huge fan of hiring a legend to be a general manager, a coach, even an assistant coach, is because then you got to fire Paul Coffey. And that's awkward. And nobody wants to embarrass anyone. And sports are a very hyper competitive, very masculine space where getting fired, but we're being slighted can really look awkward and really come off poorly. So it's unfortunate the Oilers had to move on, but I do appreciate the fact that Stan Bowman was looking for solutions. And although changing the coach is the easiest thing you can do as a GM, it's a lot easier to change the coach than the manager. It's a lot easier to change the manager or coach than it is the players because there's only one of them. You can't get a whole new team. You can get a new coach. You can get a new manager. And I think Jake Walman is going to have a very impressive season. I would not be surprised if Jake Walman played his way into a 30, 40-point season. I would like to see Jake Walman and Evan Bouchard on the penalty kill more. The Oilers did that later. They went in the postseason where they recognized the need for mobility. And realistically, the ceiling or the swing within this group is contingent on Darnell Nurse. What version of Nurse are you going to get? And how long is he going to keep it? At the start of last year, he was abominable. Granted, he was playing hurt. He missed most of the preseason. He did not look good. The Oilers were giving up 70% of the goals in game states when Nurse was on the ice through the first month and change of the season. As the year went along, the variance stabilized. Nurse played passable hockey, and then you got to the playoffs, and the warts jump out. And that's the thing. with a player like Nurse, a lot of it is decision making. And at this point in Nurse's career, you're not going to be able to convince him his instincts are wrong. His instincts are why he's been in the NHL for the last 10 years. His instincts are what has gotten him to this point in his career. And it's a really awkward position to be in as a coach, where you got to tell a guy who knows better, what are you doing? Why are you making that pinch? Why are you trying to go throw that hit? Why are you leaving the net front? Those types of questions come down to decision making. They come down to positioning. And I, for my money, think positioning is the most valuable trait a defender can have. Are you in the right place at the right time? And some of that comes down to foot speed, sure, but you can be an elite defenseman without great foot speed. You can be in the right place at the right time if you have good anticipation, if you understand the flow of the game well. And for me, I'm very curious to see if Ty Emberson can stick. I liked what I saw from Emberson last year a lot. I feel he had more to give, but ultimately the Oilers opted for John Klingberg, which I get. John Klingberg was good with Jake Walman in the playoffs. And look, I understand that Klingberg played pretty bad hockey those 10 regular season games he played before going on LTIR, and then he looked very, very different once the postseason started. His mobility was a lot better. He looked a lot less apprehensive to make plays, whereas in those 11 regular season games, he just kind of looked awkward. And granted, the guy hadn't played hockey in a few years, and yes, it would have been nice. I wanted them to bring Klingberg back, but there was no shot the Oilers were going to match what Klingberg could get on the open market. Klingberg is going to play the first half of the year as a Shark. He's going to put up some decent counting stats. He's going to get traded to a Stanley Cup contender. The Sharks will retain half the salary. He will be on the third pair. He might contribute a little bit to a playoff run. But by and large, he knew what he was signing up for. He did this year's version of what Jeff Skinner and Victor Arvidsson did last year. Sign with the team, look for opportunities, put up stats, get traded to a better team, and deal with the problem later. I really feel this group is equipped to answer the bell the best of the Oilers' three position groups. I think the Ekholm-Bouchard pair being as dominant as it's been, for as long as it's been too, more than 3 seasons, and those dominant playoff results, I feel great about the defense. And I know they don't profile as a lockdown defensive team. You know, they're not like Vegas. They're not like Carolina. They're not like Florida. They are a situationally advantaged defense. When they are in the right situations, they can really take advantage. I struggle with the Oilers offensively, but their defense should be enough to offset some of the losses. And look, the defense alone is not going to answer all of the offensive questions. Some of that is going to come down to our goaltending situation. It's going to come down to Stuart Skinner and Calvin Pickard, which will be the subject of tomorrow's show with a very simple question. Can the Oilers get 905 or better goaltending? That'll do it for today's show. Be sure to subscribe to Locked On Oilers wherever you get your podcasts. Be sure to subscribe to Locked On Oilers over on YouTube. Be sure to do the Locked On survey to get a chance at one of those $100 gift cards. I will talk to you guys tomorrow. Until then, let's go Oilers.